I always knew silence could be dangerous. I didn't expect it to be mine. 75 candles. One for every year. I refused to disappear. The dining room of the Bramwell estate flickered with warm light, golden reflections dancing across glassware older than my daughter-in-law's ethics. I stood in the corner beside the antique sideboard, oak, carved, and far sturdier than the family currently orbiting my life. "Isolda, darling." Celeste's voice, all performative warmth and too many vowels, cut across the clatter of plates. "You simply must try the salmon roulade. Rowan had it catered specially." Translation: "You're not in control anymore, and we're here to remind you." I smiled, softly, politely. I had perfected that smile at faculty dinners, board meetings, and during the 23 years I spent married to a man who loved power more than partnership. But tonight, it felt different. Brittle, like the rim of a glass that's just beginning to crack. Celeste was dressed like an interior design catalog had vomited on her. All velvet and pearl drop earrings and curated elegance. Rowan beside her looked like a man playing a role he hadn't auditioned for. Too stiff, too eager to impress an audience that no longer existed. My audience was the silence between moments, the unguarded ones, the ones where people forget you're still listening. The party was elegant, yes. A chamber quartet, soft candlelight, enough flowers to hide behind. And yet it all felt staged, like a eulogy delivered just a few days early. "Mother, you look radiant," Rowan said earlier as I entered, kissing the air beside my cheek like a politician. 75 never looked so sharp. I had taught philosophy for 40 years. I could recognize a false premise before the sentence finished forming. After the 5th glass of champagne I didn't want, and the 7th compliment I didn't need, I excused myself. No drama. Just a slight touch to Willa's arm, our code for cover me. She nodded. Always alert. Always watching. The only person here not pretending. I walked down the hall toward the conservatory, the only room Celeste hadn't redecorated yet. It still smelled of citrus and overwatered ferns, still carried echoes of conversations I used to enjoy. That's when I heard them. Laughter, hushed but sharp, glass clink. Then Celeste's voice, buoyant and venomous. "To our inheritance." A pause, then Rowan. 6 months tops. They laughed again, not cruelly, casually, like weather or football. I froze, not because I didn't expect betrayal. Betrayal is a slow art. It arrives as help, then favor, then suggestion, then control. Rowan had been painting his masterpiece for months, but hearing it, that toasted phrase, so polished, so final, was something else entirely. The walls of the conservatory suddenly felt smaller. I reached for the nearest shelf, fingers brushing the spines of the philosophy books I'd placed there 20 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, Hannah Arendt, Camus. Thinkers who understood that death isn't always sudden, it can be administrative. My breath steadied. I didn't storm in. I didn't collapse. I didn't even cry. I did what I'd always done in the face of chaos. I designed a response. I turned, walked back down the corridor, rejoined the party. The quartet played Vivaldi. Celeste was laughing too loudly near the champagne tower. Rowan was shaking hands with the managing director of a firm he hoped to impress. And I, Isolda Bramwell, Professor Emerita, widow, and apparently a countdown clock, smiled. "Are you enjoying yourself?" a guest asked me, adjusting his cufflinks. "Immensely," I replied. "It's always fascinating to see what people reveal when they think you're not paying attention." He chuckled, not understanding. Most people never do. I made a quiet toast to myself later in the kitchen after most guests had left. One glass of dry wine, one bite of cake, one thought. They think they've already buried me. But I haven't even started drafting the blueprints. The first thing to go was the mornings. I used to wake early, habit born from decades of teaching, long before I needed alarm clocks. Sunrise meant coffee, reading, pruning the garden with shears I'd had since the Reagan administration. But slowly, sunrise turned to midday. My limbs refused to cooperate. My mind, usually sharp and eager, felt wrapped in gauze. At first I blamed age. 75 is not 70. I accepted the tremors in my hands like old professors accept tenure, quietly and with some irony. But then the tremors grew into drops. The cup, the pen, the fork. Things that once obeyed me began slipping through my fingers like I was the ghost in my own house. Then there was the sleep. Not the gentle kind that comes with tea and a book. No, this was the kind that dropped on me without warning. I'd sit down to sort through correspondence and wake up 3 hours later with an open envelope in one hand and nothing remembered of the time in between. Of course, Dr. Greaves would have caught it. He treated me for years, not just as a patient but as a peer. He never once called me dear or spoke slower because of my gray hair. When my husband passed, it was Greaves who cleared his desk and came to the memorial without a tie because Elliot hated them. But Dr. Greaves was no longer convenient. 9 months ago, Rowan sat me down after one of my dizzy spells. "Mom," he said, with the kind of gentle authority children practice when they want control to feel like love. "Dr. Greaves is outdated. He's kind, but he's not equipped for the newer treatments. Dr. Keene is excellent, Harvard-trained. We've already scheduled a consult." And just like that, one of my few constants was gone, replaced with Dr. Ellis Keene, a man with antiseptic hands and a stare too polished to be sincere. He prescribed new pills before we finished our first conversation. "For mood stabilization," he'd said. "For heart irregularity," he'd said. "For sleep support," he'd said. And I, Isolda Bramwell, who taught Descartes and debated ontological arguments before breakfast, took them, without question, until last night, until the champagne and the 6 months tops, until I realized that my body might not be failing me. Someone else might be helping it fail. This morning the symptoms felt different. They weren't mine anymore. They were evidence. I dressed slower than usual, not out of weakness but calculation. A long linen tunic, soft-soled shoes, eyes alert, hands steady only when I willed them to be. I moved through my home like a guest at her own wake. The house had changed, too. My late husband Elliot had once called it my concrete cathedral, a sprawling Vermont estate built with glass, wood, and the stubbornness of 2 academic salaries. But over the last year, Celeste had quietly hollowed it out. The Persian rugs I brought back from Istanbul, rolled away and replaced with sand-colored abstracts. The bust of Sappho from my lectern, removed for being too stern-looking. Even the bookshelves had shifted. Austen remained. Camus did not. The house now smelled of eucalyptus and expensive nothingness. It no longer reflected thought. It reflected taste. Hare and I found Willa March in the sunroom, sorting invoices. Her fingers moved methodically, but she looked up the second I entered. She stood. "You're up early." "Am I?" I asked gently. She tilted her head, studying me like someone taking a temperature without touching a forehead. "Earlier than you've been?" I sat beside her. No preamble, no pretense. "Willa, have I changed?" She didn't blink. "Yes." "In what way?" Her voice was quiet, firm. "You've been different, but I don't think it's you." It landed like a door unlocking. "How long?" I asked. 6, maybe 7 months. You started repeating things. You got angry once, over the estate taxes. Then 2 days later, you couldn't remember the conversation. I nodded slowly. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't you that forgot. It was you that looked confused about forgetting." We sat in the silence between sentences. Then she said it, the thing I needed most. "I don't think you're sick, Isolda. I think someone wants you to look like you are." The first pill I didn't swallow was small, pale blue, and neatly engraved with a number I couldn't read without glasses. It sat on my tongue like any other, bitter and forgettable, until I curled it under, tucked it against the soft tissue behind my lower molar, and smiled up at Rowan as he handed me a glass of water. "There you go," he said, all smooth concern. "Doctor, Keene says this will really help with your focus." He was right. It did. Just not in the way he expected. I nodded, swallowed the water alone, and thanked him. That night, I spit the pill into a folded linen napkin and dropped it into a tiny velvet-lined box once meant for earrings. By morning, the box held 2 more. The performance began, a quiet, methodical role. I didn't need to rant or accuse or cry. I needed to listen, to remember, to observe my own mind like a stranger and ask, is this you? Or is this them? And if there was even a shred of me left, I owed her the effort to answer. For the next week, I continued the charade. I took every pill, with water, with gratitude, with the practiced swallow of a university speaker who survived more than one overly catered faculty luncheon. My body might have played the part of the aging mother, but my mind? My mind was staging a coup. By the 7th day, I had gathered 11 pills. I cataloged them in a lined notebook: shape, color, imprint, time delivered, time disposed. Next, I bought a new deck of logic puzzles, word games, brain teasers, nothing extreme, just enough to measure. Each morning I timed myself. Each night I recorded a voice memo. Today I walked to the library wing without needing to stop. The tremor lasted 7 seconds, not 20. Puzzle score, 86%. Data, evidence, foundation. On the 3rd morning, I called her. My student from the 2004 seminar on moral constructs in a post-truth era. Back then, she had a sharp tongue, an overused thesaurus, and a quiet fury for the way systems devoured people like her mother. An undocumented seamstress who died waiting for approval letters that never came. Now she was an award-winning investigative journalist, the kind who knew where to dig and how to dig silently. She answered on the 2nd ring. Professor Bramwell? Her voice hadn't aged, still electric. Delphine, I need your brain and your discretion. A pause, then, tell me when and where. We met at a botanical garden halfway between her loft in Boston and my estate in Vermont. I wore sunglasses, a scarf, and the kind of wide-brimmed hat that said, "Don't ask." She came with a notebook and a recorder she didn't turn on. I laid out the facts, the symptoms, the new doctor, the overheard toast, the changing papers, the pills I was collecting. Delphine didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "You think they're manufacturing incompetence. I think they're accelerating it," I replied. Her lips pressed into a line. "Do you have a lawyer?" "I have something better. I have truth. I just need someone who knows how to shape it." "I'm in," she said. "But we do this my way, quiet, careful, and no dramatic speeches." "I'm 75, not theatrical," I said. She laughed. "That's the biggest lie I've ever heard you tell." That same week, I tracked down Dr. Lionel Greaves. He now practiced part-time out of a small clinic in Barre. Retired technically, but still sharp. "Isolda Bramwell," he said as I entered his office. "You look not as fragile as they say." "They're wrong," I said, "and I need you to prove it." He ran every test discreetly: cognition, cardiovascular, reflexes, toxin levels. When he read the results, his brow furrowed. "You're not senile," he said. "You're sedated." He reviewed the prescription list Celeste kept taped to the kitchen bulletin board. "These combinations, Isolda, this isn't treatment, it's sabotage." I nodded. "Then let's build the case to prove it." As I left, I passed a mirror in the hallway. For the first time in months, the woman looking back at me had something familiar in her eyes. Not grief, not fear, not confusion, blueprints. There was a time when I trusted my body implicitly. It was never particularly athletic, but it had been obedient. A strong spine for lecturing 3 hours straight, steady hands for underlining first edition margins, a voice that didn't tremble when men twice my age tried to question me mid-panel. But recently, I had come to trust it even less than I trusted Rowan. Which is to say, not at all. The betrayal wasn't just internal anymore. It was pharmacological, mechanical, intentional. And if I couldn't count on my body, I'd rely on the other thing I'd always had, my mind. Or at least the part of it that was still untouched by drowsy pills and manufactured fog. "Let's begin with your medicine cabinet," Willa said that morning, standing beside me in my ensuite bathroom like a field operative preparing for extraction. "Top left shelf. I've seen them move things around when they think I'm out running errands." We started pulling bottles, Line them on the marble counter like suspects in a police lineup. 10 containers, 7 of which had handwritten labels, 4 with mismatched pharmacy numbers, 3 with no markings at all. One laughably said only, "Sleep Aid, PM," which sounded more like a grocery store supplement than anything prescribed by a Harvard-trained cardiologist. Willa pulled out her phone and began snapping photos. Labels, capsules, even the foam-lined pill sorter Celeste insisted on using for clarity. "They said it's easier for you this way," Willa murmured almost to herself. "Easier for them," I corrected. We laid out a spreadsheet on my laptop and started cataloging. Dosage, shape, color, time of administration, side effects noticed, pills withheld, pills pocketed. It was meticulous, tedious work. My kind of work. Dr. Greaves reviewed the entries during our next meeting. "Sedatives," he said, tapping a capsule on the list. "Long-term, high dosage." He pointed to another. "Anticholinergics. Common side effects include confusion, memory loss, tremors, blurred vision." I watched his face harden as he scrolled. "Isolda, if you had continued on these without interruption, you would have developed textbook symptoms of early-stage dementia within 6 months. 6 months, I repeated. The same timeline Rowan had whispered into Celeste's champagne. Greaves removed his glasses and folded them with the care of someone containing fury. "This isn't sloppy prescribing. It's deliberate. I didn't cry. I didn't scream." I opened my notebook and made another entry. "Greaves confirms deliberate pharmaceutical sabotage. Prescriptions designed to mimic cognitive decline. Timeline aligns with overheard inheritance conversation. Evidence is easier to build than trust, especially once trust is already shattered." The next breach came not in a bottle, but a lock. The safe in my study, Elliot's old brass and steel contraption tucked behind the Aramaic tapestry no one ever noticed, hadn't been opened in months, or so I thought. When I entered the room that afternoon, Willa was already there, flipping through paperwork. "Did you move the estate binders?" I asked. She looked up slowly. "Number, but someone did." I approached the safe and noticed it immediately. The hinge had a small scratch on it, fresh. The rotary dial was off by a centimeter, just enough to say someone had been here. Someone who wasn't me. We opened it. Inside, the trust paperwork had been reorganized, not missing but altered. Addenda added. Certain assets, stocks, bonds, secondary properties, flagged with unfamiliar post-it notes in Celeste's handwriting. "They've already drafted a transition plan," I muttered, leafing through the stack. "They've moved the account signatory lines, created secondary custodianship clauses. I'm not being phased out. I've already been declared functionally absent." Willa exhaled. "They've been treating you like you're gone." "They're planning for it," I said, "which means it's time I did too." The next morning, I called Arden Vale. I had heard about Arden from one of my former colleagues, a woman who had gone toe-to-toe with a predatory grandson trying to liquidate his grandmother's estate for a cryptocurrency startup. Arden had stopped the sale, frozen the accounts, and had the grandson evicted, all within 48 hours. She wasn't cheap, but she was quiet, brutal, and undefeated. We met in a private conference room inside a quiet law office tucked behind a flower shop in Montpellier. She wore no makeup, carried no briefcase, just a single phone and a fountain pen. After listening to my story, she didn't ask if I was sure. She asked, "How far do you want to go?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "All the way to the truth, then a little farther, to make sure they don't come back." She nodded. "Then let's get to work." They thought the house had turned on me, that the long corridors confused me, that I forgot which rooms still bore my imprint and which ones Celeste had bleached into banality, that I mistook silence for absence and stillness for surrender. But I didn't forget, because I designed this house. I chose where the light hit in the mornings, where footsteps echoed just enough to intimidate a guest, and where to place the vents so sound would carry without being obvious. I knew the dead zones in the intercom system, the corners where heat lingered longer, the way one floorboard creaked just outside the solarium if your weight shifted left. They believed they were orchestrating my erasure inside a space I had crafted like a cathedral. They forgot who the architect was. Delphine arrived under the pretense of delivering estate marketing materials. She wore oversized sunglasses and carried a thin leather portfolio, but what was inside wasn't brochures. It was tech, discreet, powerful, and legal only in countries where journalists disappear overnight. "Where do you want eyes?" she asked without looking up. "Everywhere they think I can't see," I replied. We started in the kitchen, a micro camera in the molding above the pantry, another disguised in a decorative magnet on the fridge. One Rowan insisted we keep because it said family first in crooked lettering. The study came next. Intercom rewired for audio pickup. A motion-triggered mic behind the painting Celeste had hung to replace my framed doctoral thesis. "They're going to say this is unethical," I murmured as Delphine adjusted the angle of the lens behind the grandfather clock. "They're poisoning you," she replied. "Unethical's off the table." That night I feigned one of my spells, eyes unfocused, speech delayed, hand trembling slightly as I reached for water. Celeste helped me to bed like I was an ailing cat, and Rowan stood in the doorway with an expression caught between pity and calculation. "You're doing so well," he said, gently brushing hair from my forehead like I was already a body in a casket. I smiled weakly. Some days are clearer than others. The moment they left, I turned on the secure laptop Delphine had installed inside an empty heirloom tea tin. The feed sprang to life. Audio, video, motion-triggered logs, every room where a lie might be spoken. By morning, we had our first confession. Celeste was in the sitting room, on a call. "Yes, I understand the appraisal," she said, her voice low, amused. "But once her estate's cleared, we'll be liquidating quickly. I want a number on the table within 2 months." She paused, sipping something from the mug I used to drink cocoa from in the winters. "Yes, historic footprint. Woodwork's dated, but the bones are excellent. The new foundation can be knocked out." She was talking about my house, my legacy, like it was expired produce. The next day, Rowan sat in the library, back to the window, speaking on speakerphone. "Dr. Keene," he said, voice smooth. "She still has good days, but it's slipping fast." I leaned closer to the feed. The audio was clean. "We should act before she gets combative," Rowan continued. "You said the current dosage would keep her manageable, but her paranoia is increasing. She started asking Willa strange questions." A pause. "Yes, I understand the legal risks, but the longer we wait, the more erratic she'll become. If we push through guardianship now, we'll avoid future resistance." I didn't flinch, didn't cry. I paused the recording, made a backup, labeled the file Sun-Phase Escalation-Timestamp Verified. They weren't planning to wait for my mind to fade. They were planning to force the final stage, and do it under the banner of compassion. They wanted control dressed up as care. I didn't want to escape. I wanted to reveal, not with rage, with precision. That night I moved through the house like a designer revisiting a long-completed project, each crevice a code, each angle a weapon. The same walls they used to trap me would become the stage where I'd show them to the world. They built their plan inside my blueprint, and I had just drawn the revisions. I never used to write to Elliot, not in the years after his death, not in those lonely midnights when I could still hear the faint creak of his footsteps in the hallway, or catch the ghost of his aftershave in my closet. Elliot Bramwell had been many things. Stoic, exacting, impossible to distract. But romantic? Never. He wrote verdicts, not valentines. Love for him was demonstrated through presence, protection, and silence at the right time. So when I picked up my fountain pen and began addressing him by name, I wasn't reaching for closure. I was baiting a trap. "Dearest Elliot," I began, the ink soaking into cream linen paper that hadn't been used since the last estate gala. "Something's been wrong with me. Not just in the body, I can feel it in the walls." I paused, not because the sentence felt overwrought, but because it needed to. If Rowan was reading my files, and I now believed with certainty that he was, then I had to speak in the language he expected from a confused, unraveling woman. Not in arguments or citations or even journal entries. Letters, private, vulnerable. designed to appear hidden. I kept going. I've started forgetting things, small things at first. The names of trees in the garden, the order of spices in the drawer. But now it's creeping closer. There are days I wake up and feel like a stranger in my own home, like I'm vanishing inside it. I reread the paragraph and smiled. It was perfect. The kind of manufactured fragility that someone like Rowan would accept without skepticism. The kind of fear that made a guardianship filing look compassionate instead of criminal. I wrote 4 more letters over the next 10 days. In each, I leaned further into confusion, describing moments of imagined panic, misplacing items, forgetting where I left my tea, shadows that seemed longer than they were. I never included any real details. No mentions of the surveillance. No hint that I'd stopped taking the pills. No references to Willa or Delphine or Dr. Greaves. Just fear. Just fog. Just enough to create plausible deniability. Delphine called it strategic disintegration. "You're giving them the rope," she said, scanning a digital copy of the second letter on her encrypted tablet. "Now we wait to see if they hang themselves with it." Meanwhile, she'd begun pulling the thread that always unravels quiet greed: money. Rowan had underestimated Delphine's range. He assumed a journalist would poke around in letters or old newspaper clippings. He forgot that Delphine Reyes had built her reputation exposing white-collar crime from within closed financial systems. She texted me late one evening while I was sketching at my desk. No greeting, just a number, $1.2 million. The next message came before I could reply. 3 shell corporations, Cayman, all registered under mid-tier LLCs in upstate New York. Initial transfer began 7 months ago. Weekly deposits, gradual uptick. I stared at the screen, then slowly set the phone down. 7 months ago was when the tremors started, when the medication changed, when Rowan replaced Dr. Greaves, when Celeste stopped calling me mother and started calling me Isolda in the same tone she reserved for caterers. I picked up the phone and called Delphine directly. "Can you trace where the money originated?" "Already have," she said. "It started in your discretionary account, one you rarely use. They've been moving it in increments just below the reporting threshold. Classic laundering behavior. But we have the trail." "Do you have enough to expose it?" "Not yet, but we're getting there." "Keep digging," I said, "and let me know when it's time to make it public." After we hung up, I returned to my letters. In the next one, I described a fictional dream where I saw Elliot standing by the lake, beckoning me home. I spoke of fear, of forgetting his face, of fading into the shadows of the estate. It would make any court-ordered psychiatrist nod solemnly. It would make any judge question my reliability. And it would make it that much more shocking when I stood before them later, lucid, prepared, armed with records and wire transfers and surveillance files bearing timestamps and transcripts. They thought I was drifting, but I was drafting. And these letters, they weren't cries for help. They were a preface to war. The embossed invitation arrived tucked into a pale blue envelope, sealed with a wax crest I hadn't approved in 40 years. "To celebrate the life and legacy of Isolda Bramwell," it read, with cursive so ornate it nearly apologized for the audacity. A small gathering of family, friends, and community figures to commemorate a remarkable woman and gently guide the next chapter forward. Guide the next chapter forward. I read the phrase twice. It was elegant language for erasure. The event was to be hosted at the estate, a formal dinner in the West Garden under string lights and practiced smiles. Rowan and Celeste had summoned estate attorneys, board members from the local university, 2 reporters from the New England Profile, and a senior advisor from the Vermont Elder Law Consortium. I knew what this was. It wasn't a celebration. It was a carefully staged handover, from me to them, a public moment of diminishing returns. Smile for the guests, tell a few fond stories, then discreetly disappear into the mist of assumed incompetence. What they didn't know was that I'd already read the working draft of the trust reassignment they planned to announce that evening. It had been left in the printer tray of Rowan's basement office, where he assumed I never ventured. He should have remembered. I designed this house. I know where the paper rests before it breathes. And so, IRSV'd. Yes, I would be delighted to attend, I said aloud to no one, folding the invitation with perfect symmetry. But on my terms. The evening was mild, Vermont's late summer putting on its best dress for a crowd of casual vultures. The air smelled of roses and barely concealed anticipation. I wore slate blue silk, tailored sharp, understated pearls. Hair swept up in the way Elliot once said made me look like a woman who'd survived a fire without blinking. Willa met me just before I entered the garden. "They've seated you at the end," she murmured, "between Reverend Talcott and the university bursar." "Perfect," I said. "Let the sermon begin." Inside the tented garden, everything had the sterile warmth of a well-funded ambush. String quartets, saffron risotto, the illusion of gentility with none of its soul. Rowan stood near the podium, rehearsing something with the estate's legal advisor. Celeste was already mingling, her hand a ghost on every arm. She wore grief in pearls and ambition in heels. Delphine, posing as a freelance writer covering architectural legacies, arrived 5 minutes after me with a camera crew. She greeted me like we'd just met, complimenting my dress. I nodded graciously and handed her a flash drive hidden inside a gold lipstick tube. Inside it, audio of Rowan and Dr. Keene discussing my eventual incapacitation, and a call from Celeste to a luxury care facility in Aspen. Dinner began with what they called an honoring toast. Celeste stood first. 75 years of brilliance, grace, and civic leadership, she said, her voice like warm syrup sliding over broken glass. And now, as we begin to gently carry the weight of that legacy forward, I clinked my glass. She froze. The timing was surgical. I rose slowly. "My apologies," I said, smiling at the guests. "I thought we were toasting to something, but it seems we're rehearsing a eulogy." A few chuckled nervously. Celeste laughed too, but her eyes didn't. I turned toward the group. "It's true. I'm 75. I'm slower to rise from chairs. I've started keeping a magnifier by my favorite mystery novels. But I assure you, my mind is not a fading photograph. A beat. In fact, it's never been sharper." Now came the second moment, the one I'd practiced. Delphine stepped forward. "Would you mind if I showed the guests something?" she asked. "As part of my coverage?" Rowan looked up sharply. "I'm not sure that's appropriate." "I think it is," I said gently. "This is a tribute, after all." She clicked a remote. The garden's side wall became a projection screen. Audio played loud and crisp. Rowan's voice. "We should act soon. She still has good days, but it's slipping fast. If we wait, she might get combative. Celeste. Aspen has discreet protocols. High-end. We just need medical justification." Gasps. Then silence. I watched faces turn toward me, some confused, some furious, some suddenly very sober. Celeste stepped back. Rowan stood frozen. "I trusted you," I said softly, but with weight. "And you used that trust to paint me as a relic, an obstacle." "I am not your obstacle. I am your architect." I looked directly at the lawyers seated in the center row. "Tomorrow morning, my attorney will issue formal statements. Tonight, you've all witnessed enough." Then I smiled. Not out of joy, out of certainty. I hadn't come to be honored. I'd come to be heard. They expected me to wilt. That was their first mistake. The second was giving me a platform wrapped in white linen and crystal glassware. 6 weeks after I overheard my son and his wife toast to my inheritance, I returned, not as the doting matriarch they hoped to quietly retire, but as something else entirely. The woman who built this family's fortune, and the one who would now dismantle their illusion of control. The air was unusually still for a September evening. No wind to rustle the manicured hedges, no bird song, just a tension thick enough to hang between the wine glasses, the same tented garden, the same estate. But this time, I arrived as the storm. A crimson silk coat hung from my shoulders, elegant, architectural in its cut. My hair was pulled back into a knot so tight it could anchor a courtroom. Pearl earrings, but no necklace. I didn't need adornment. The only thing shining tonight would be the truth. Rowan spotted me as I stepped onto the lawn, and for a moment, his face dropped. Barely, but I caught it. Celeste turned sharply, her smile freezing in place. Whatever script they'd rehearsed, whatever tribute speech Rowan had written, was already ash in his throat. Willa walked just behind me. Arden Vale, dressed in navy and holding a slim leather briefcase, followed. "Are you certain?" Willa whispered. "Absolutely," I said. "They built this play. I'm just rewriting the ending." The guests, once murmuring politely over cocktails, fell quiet as I stepped toward the podium. No one had announced me. No one had dared. I reached the front and let the silence hold. "Thank you," I began. My voice didn't tremble. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but it seems a few things have been said in my name lately, and I'd like to clarify. I turned slightly. "Rowan, darling, would you mind holding this?" I handed him a manila envelope. He reached for it instinctively, still playing the good son. His fingers trembled slightly as he looked inside. His lips moved as he read the first page. Surveillance transcripts, medical records with Dr. Greaves' signature, offshore bank transfers traced and notarized. Then the USB drive, clearly labeled Aspen Admissions Call, August 12th. Celeste took one look and paled like snow under floodlights. Arden stepped forward now, voice calm and unhurried. "Rowan Whitaker Bramwell and Celeste Monroe Bramwell," she said with crisp legal weight. "You've been served." 2 cream-colored summonses. No fanfare, just justice. Rowan didn't move. Celeste blinked too fast. The guests, professors, attorneys, board chairs, were no longer pretending not to listen. They were riveted. I turned back to them. "I apologize for the interruption," I said lightly, "but I've made a few adjustments." I pulled a second envelope from my coat pocket and laid it on the podium. "This is my updated will, and these," I held up 3 bound booklets, "are the founding documents of the Bramwell Foundation for Civic Literacy and Elder Advocacy." Murmurs rippled like thunder beneath the garden's canopy. "My house is no longer an inheritance, it's a campus." I glanced at Rowan. "My accounts are no longer family assets, they're public trusts." I looked at Celeste, her mouth slightly open, a hand clutching the back of a chair. "And as for my name, I'll carry it myself, thank you." Then I let the silence breathe. They needed to sit with it. The betrayal, the exposure, the reversal. I waited 1 full beat, long enough for every guest to process what they had witnessed. And then I said it. The sentence I'd crafted with Arden, polished like a blade. "I've changed my will, and my beneficiaries. You're not in either." A soft gasp from someone in the crowd. Maybe Reverend Talcott, or perhaps the university bursar who had recently taken a substantial donation from Celeste's philanthropic advisory. Celeste spoke at last. Her voice was shrill, unraveling. "You can't, this is defamation." "No," Arden interrupted coolly. "It's prosecution, and you'll receive full documentation by Monday." Rowan still hadn't spoken. He was staring at the documents, the summons, the USB drive, at the cracks in the world he thought was already his. I stepped away from the podium. Willa met me at the garden steps. "Ready, Mrs. Bramwell?" "No," I said, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "But I'm no longer waiting to be." And with that, I walked out of the garden I once designed, leaving behind the weeds that thought they owned it. Vermont mornings are sharp in October. Crisp light, the smell of wood smoke, and enough silence to think clearly. I stood by the front windows of the west parlor, the same ones Celeste had once covered with ivory drapes for minimalism. They were gone now. I had them replaced with mullioned glass, the kind that catches morning sun like stained light. The estate, my estate, was under lock, audit, and transformation. Not ruined, repurposed. The media, of course, had a field day, but I didn't mind. Let them. Philosopher Outsmart's family in quiet battle of inheritance read the front page of the Vermont Ledger. Right beneath a grainy still from the surveillance footage, Rowan standing beside Dr. Keene, whispering, We should act before she gets combative. The truth had a way of shining without help. Celeste's social accounts disappeared within 48 hours. Her PR firm dropped her. The same non-profit board she once chaired put out a statement. We are disheartened by the allegations and stand with the cause of ethical elder care. Rowan was less dramatic, just quieter. A terse email to his colleagues at the university citing a leave of absence and a withdrawn manuscript from a publishing house that now wanted nothing to do with the philosopher of legacy ethics. Dr. Keene, on the other hand, faced a different kind of reckoning. The Vermont State Medical Review Board suspended his license indefinitely. The cocktail of medications he'd prescribed, sedatives, anticholinergics, antipsychotics, and subclinical dosages, were no longer buried under jargon. They were called what they were: coercive control, medically disguised. Several other families came forward. One woman, whose mother died under Keene's care last spring, called Arden in tears. "We thought we were crazy," she said. "Turns out we were just being silenced." The system finally was listening. The estate was frozen for 3 weeks, standard procedure. Arden, meticulous as ever, navigated the forensic maze of probate court and financial recovery. Every amended trust, every updated will Rowan had filed without my knowledge, every overseas wire transfer Celeste approved through my digital signature, reversed, audited, exposed. But this wasn't just about taking something back. It was about giving something forward. I announced the launch of the Bramwell Center for Ethical Thought on the estate's front steps. Willa stood beside me, her clipboard full of names of local faculty, youth educators, and legal scholars who had accepted advisory roles. Delphine flew in from Boston to document it for the New England Review. Her article was simple, poetic, piercing. Inheritance is more than money. It's the ideas we refuse to bury. My house, originally built with Elliot, was no longer a mausoleum to tradition. It was alive again. Lecture halls took shape in the East Wing. A residency program for elder justice advocates was scheduled to begin next spring. Willa moved into the guest house with her partner and 2 rescue dogs. She now ran operations as executive director, a title she wore without ceremony but with quiet command. And what of Rowan and Celeste? They weren't in prison yet. Legal wheels turned slowly, and Arden warned me not to hope for dramatic sentencing. "Courtrooms don't always hand out catharsis," she said over tea one evening. "But they do hand out consequences." Celeste filed a motion for separate legal representation. I wasn't surprised. Rowan issued a vague public statement. "We regret that certain misunderstandings within our family have become public. We hope to resolve matters privately and with dignity." Dignity, in this case, came in the form of subpoenas, public inquiries, and frozen assets. What they didn't realize was this: I never wanted revenge. That was their world. One of scarcity, competition, possession. They saw inheritance as something to steal. I saw legacy as something to build. They wanted to inherit a house. I gave the house a future instead. They wanted to inherit power. I handed the power to others. In the end, they got exactly what they feared: a version of me they couldn't control. A woman not weakened by age but sharpened by it. A philosopher who knew when silence was strategic and when it was time to speak. On the eve of the center's official opening, Delphine asked me, "Would you do anything differently?" I considered it. "I wouldn't have waited so long," I said. Then I smiled. "But sometimes you have to let the fuse run just long enough to make the light show count. They say legacy is bloodline, but I've lived long enough to know that's a marketing myth. Legacy is decision, and I was done letting others write mine." The Bramwell Center opened its doors on a brisk Monday morning in November. We didn't do a ribbon cutting. That felt too ceremonial, too final. Instead, we held a roundtable discussion on aging and autonomy in the humanities library I had once called my reading room. The same room Celeste tried to convert into a cigar lounge. Now it smelled like books again. Old ones. The kind with ideas that take root. Willa sat at the head of the new operations desk, not wearing a lanyard or title badge, just her soft gray cardigan and that steel-backed calm she carried like breath. "I don't know how you want to be introduced," one of the facilitators asked her that morning. "Just say I run the house," Willa replied. "Everything else is extra." It was perfect. It was true. The first initiative we launched was personal. Scholarships, small but dignified, specifically for women over 60 returning to study philosophy, history, literature. Women who'd once put down books to raise children, bury parents, nurse sick husbands, run households they were never paid to run. Now they were returning to the realm of thought, and the Bramwell Center would cover the tuition. We called it the Isolda Fund for continuing inquiry. Some thought the name too formal. I didn't care. A legacy shouldn't apologize for clarity. The applications arrived in waves, typed, handwritten, voice recorded. One woman submitted an essay in the form of a poem titled, "My Mind Isn't Retired." Another attached a photo of herself at her kitchen table beside a dog-eared copy of Arendt's The Human Condition. We funded 30 in the first month, 72 more the second. Delphine's exposé, The Pharmacon Trap, How Eldercare Became a Legal Loophole, was picked up by The Atlantic and later syndicated by European outlets. What began as a personal investigation into my case expanded into something grim and necessary. 2 more families came forward, both of them citing Dr. Keene by name. One in Montpellier, one in Albany. In both cases, similar medication patterns, subtle trust reassignments, quiet legal prep. One victim didn't survive. The other was recovering in a rehabilitation center, still unaware of what had nearly happened. Delphine told me over coffee, "You weren't just the first. You were the first to fight loud enough." I corrected her gently. "I fought long enough. There's a difference." The New York Times sent a senior feature writer. She spent 2 days shadowing the center, walking our gardens, interviewing me in the solarium where I'd once overheard my own funeral being toasted. She was elegant, curious, and sharp, but not sentimental. I appreciated that. On the last day, she asked, "Do you feel like you escaped?" I shook my head. "I didn't escape. I redesigned." She paused. "Could you explain?" I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands. "You escape a prison. You redesign a structure. My life wasn't a cell. It was a building made of wrong assumptions. I didn't tear it down. I redrew the blueprints." That became her pull quote. Front page Sunday feature. I didn't escape. I redesigned. I hadn't heard from Rowan. Not directly. I did receive a typed letter, vague, defensive. Something about distorted narratives and legacy under pressure. It sounded more like a PR memo than a son trying to make peace. He never used the word sorry. Not once. I folded it once, then again, and filed it under documentation. Not to keep it safe. To keep it irrelevant. Later that week, I walked the grounds with Willa. The leaves had finished falling, and the trees looked honest again. "You sure you want to build that lecture annex on the west slope?" she asked. "You always said the soil was stubborn there." I smiled. "So am I." We stood in silence for a while. Then she said something I won't forget. "You could have left, moved somewhere warm, quiet." "I don't want quiet," I said. "I want resonance." Legacy isn't who carries your name. It's who carries your questions, and I had just begun asking the right ones. It was late October, the kind of dusk that slipped in sideways, cool, amber, almost apologetic. A few final leaves clung to the birches outside the study window, as if unsure whether to fall. That's when Willa knocked gently on the doorframe. "He's here," she said. I closed the leather-bound ledger in front of me. The grant committee's notes could wait. "Send him in." She hesitated. "Do you want me to stay nearby?" I shook my head. "If anything burns, I'll ring the bell." Rowan entered like someone rehearsing sincerity. Dark wool coat, no tie, haircut too fresh. Not mourning. Performing. "Mother," he said, as if the word itself might open a door. "I prefer Isolda," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Titles have grown complicated." He sat, smoothed his lapels, cleared his throat. "I know I'm the last person you want to see." "You're the last person I expected to see," Silence stretched between us like old wallpaper, too faded to admire, too stubborn to remove. "I didn't come to fight," he said. I nodded. "Good. You'd lose." He offered a tight smile. It didn't reach his eyes. It rarely did. I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, fingers drumming his knee. "About what happened, about how we lost our way." I raised an eyebrow. "We?" He faltered. "I mean, how I did. And Celeste, of course, she was persuasive. I was under pressure. She saw an opportunity and—" "You didn't marry evil, Rowan," I interrupted, voice even. "You partnered with it." He looked wounded, as if betrayal only counts when it's his to feel. "I didn't mean for it to go so far," he said, quieter now. "I thought you were slipping. Dr. Keene said—" "Dr. Keene was bought. You simply didn't ask the receipt. I thought I was protecting the estate. Our legacy, The word cracked like dry timber. I stood, walked to the bookshelf behind me, tracing the spine of Plato's laws before turning back. "You don't protect a legacy by poisoning its source." He dropped his gaze. The mask began to tremble. "She said you were dangerous," he murmured. "That you could change the will at any time. That you were starting to confuse dates. You didn't even recognize the bank forms." "I recognized them," I cut in. "I recognized that my name was erased. That the dates didn't match. That the paper smelled like her perfume." I leaned forward, letting the silence do most of the work. "You knew, and you signed anyway." He slumped. "I was afraid." "Of losing the money?" Of losing what I thought I deserved. There it was, naked, small, true. I watched him like I'd watch a cracked vase, fragile and still responsible for its break. He stood suddenly. "I just thought, maybe we could talk. Maybe you could forgive—" "I don't hate you, Rowan," I said calmly. "But you mistook my silence for surrender." He looked up. "You're free to rebuild," I said, moving to the door. "Just not here." Willa appeared before I needed to call. "Show Mr. Bramwell out, please." Rowan lingered a second longer, waiting for softness maybe, or permission. I offered neither. After he left, I poured a cup of black tea and returned to my desk. Outside, the light had fully gone. Only the outline of the trees remained, sharp against the navy sky. I opened my ledger and wrote one line at the top of the page: "Legacy review complete, nothing salvageable." Then I turned to the next page and began again. I used to fear endings, but this one I designed. The bells of the Bramwell Center didn't chime, they resonated. A low, rounded note, cast from bronze and intent, designed by a local artist. Installed beneath the old oak that had stood beside the house for 123 years. It rang once every morning, just after sunrise. Today, it rang for the first graduating class. The gravel path was dotted with folding chairs and gray-haired scholars in linen and silk, their backs straight, their eyes alert. Some held walking sticks, others held hands. Most held notebooks. At the lectern stood Isolda Bramwell, 76, upright, wrapped in a pale dove-gray shawl embroidered with lines from Cicero and Audre Lorde. Her voice needed no amplification, just air and intent. "When I was 30, she began, "I wrote a thesis on the fragility of public memory, that the loudest voices aren't always the wisest, and often they're the quickest to vanish." A few heads nodded. One student dabbed at her eyes. She glanced toward the oak tree, familiar with vanishing. A pause. "But I've learned that erasure requires compliance, that to be truly gone, you must agree to go quietly." She looked out over the sea of silver hair and sharp eyes, and I did not agree. Behind her, the banner of the center fluttered in the breeze. Philosophia, dignitas, renovatio, philosophy, dignity, renewal. It had once been her family crest. Now it belonged to every woman who walked these halls. "I was once told I was slipping," she continued. "Not metaphorically, medically, legally." She smiled softly, almost indulgently. "They said I forgot things. I did, but I never forgot who I was. A pause. They told me I needed help. I did, but not the kind they offered. Another pause. They told me I was lucky to have a family willing to step in. I was, just not in the direction they imagined. There was laughter, gentle, knowing, not at the expense of pain, but as its proper punctuation. Willa stood to the side, arms folded, eyes bright. A clipboard tucked under one elbow, as always. Delphine leaned against the trellis behind the ceremony arch, phone holstered, hair braided tight. She would file her final piece on the center's legacy by midnight. It was already halfway written. Isolda continued. When they tried to write me out, I rewrote the margins. When they tried to silence me, I studied the acoustics. A beat. When they thought I was breaking down, I was building. A standing ovation came before she finished. She let it happen, neither flustered nor smug, just quietly absorbing the echo. When the noise settled, she nodded once and stepped down. Later, she walked the path toward the lake. It shimmered in early afternoon light, just past the garden now tended by 4 part-time volunteers, all former students of philosophy who quoted Aristotle while weeding. Delphine caught up to her, carrying a wrapped box. "Careful," she said. "I had it engraved. Don't make me cry." "I've seen you interview corporate war criminals without blinking," Isolda said, accepting the gift. "That's work. This is earned." Willa joined them, setting down a woven picnic blanket beneath the birch tree. The women sat without ceremony. Inside the box, a polished brass plaque. "The only thing louder than inheritance is intention. I, Bramwell." The lake was still. The center buzzed faintly behind them, coffee cups clinking, someone laughing, wind in the awnings. It didn't feel like a monument, it felt like a movement. Willa poured lemonade. Delphine peeled an orange. Isolda let the light fall across her face. "I used to think legacy was a thing you pass on," she said, more to the water than to anyone else. "Like a scarf or a set of keys," she smiled. "But maybe it's something you leave in the air, in the choices people make when you're no longer watching." The shadows lengthened. A breeze skimmed across the lake. Delphine tucked the plaque under her arm. Willa began gathering the empty cups. Isolda stood slowly, adjusting her shawl. "Some women fade in silence," she said, voice soft but clear. She turned toward the water. The sun slipped behind a tree. "Others build echoes." A final breath. "I chose echoes." "Now I will read a letter to myself. And to every woman who was told she was too much, too old, or no longer needed. I am writing this in the quiet. Not the forced quiet I once endured, drugged into stillness by hands I raised and fed, but a quiet I earned, a quiet that listens and reflects, a quiet made of wisdom, not weakness. To the woman I used to be, you were not wrong to love them. You were not foolish to trust. And no, your strength did not come too late. It came precisely when you stopped apologizing for needing it. There is a particular kind of grief that women learn too early and carry too long. The grief of being gradually erased. It doesn't come all at once. It arrives in tiny, practiced cuts. "Let me handle the money now, Mom." "Why don't you rest? You seem tired." "You're remembering it wrong." "You're lucky we're here." I know the sting of those sentences. I know the ache of watching your memories get rearranged like furniture in your own home. I know what it feels like to be studied for decline instead of honored for insight. But I also know what it feels like to wake up, to reclaim time not as something lost, but something still yours. And the truth is, I didn't lose everything. I left what needed to be left behind. To every woman who has sat at her own birthday party and felt like a prop in someone else's inheritance, to every mother who's been folded into the background of her son's ambition, to every wife, widow, sister, friend who has been made to feel small for growing older, quieter, wiser, let me tell you this. You are not invisible. You are not fragile. And your story is not over. We've been taught that legacy is a will, a list of names and assets, signed on crisp paper. But legacy is so much more sacred than that. It's the courage to redesign your life, even when the world assumes you're at your end. It's the sound of your own voice, unwavering, in a room full of people who expected you to fold. It's handing someone a court summons instead of your silence. It's knowing when to open the door and when to close it for good. I once thought forgiveness was the highest form of wisdom. Now I know that discernment is. Not all people deserve access to your healing. Not all children deserve your house just because they carry your name. Let go of the guilt. Guilt is a leash they put around your neck when your spine begins to stiffen. Let it fall. Instead, hold on to your integrity like a compass. It will guide you when family fails, when friends falter, and when fear tries to build a nest inside your ribcage. Hold fast to women who see you clearly. They will become your mirror when doubt fogs the glass. I had Willa. I had Delphine. I had the ghost of my younger self whispering, "They underestimated you." Believe that voice. Be slow to disappear. Be slower to beg. And if you must burn anything, let it be the idea that you are done building. I didn't survive betrayal. I transformed it. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. Not with rage, but with design. To every woman who's still deciding what her final chapters will sound like, make them sound like you. Not your son, not your husband, not your legacy-chasing relatives. You. Let them be full of reinvention, boundaries, and yes, beauty. Whatever that word now means to you. As for me, I am content. Not because I won, but because I chose to redraw the map. Some women fade, others echo. We get to choose. And I choose to echo. Loud enough that the women who come after me never have to raise their